first attempt at a hybrid meeting for our members' meetings. So this is really a bit of an experiment. So we have a relatively small number of people here present in Paul's Cavern Cafe and a larger number of people joining us online. So welcome to our online guests. Tonight we are talking about how to go about establishing woodland ground flora. And the reason we're doing that is that obviously we are faced with a situation where most of our woodlands that we own and manage are 200-year-old plantations. Some of them on ancient woodland sites, such as Corbett and parts of Gryn, certainly. But basically, they were planted largely with beech trees. And one of the characteristics of beech trees is that as they grow into mature trees, they cast very dense canopies. They grow dense canopy, which lets very, very little light through to the ground flora. And also, they also lay down a very deep litter layer. And the litter layer is also a problem for some ground flora plants. Consequently, large areas of our woods have very little or no ground flora growing in them. Obviously, we have exceptions. We have the lovely carpets of bluebells in parts of Corbett, but there are other parts of Corbett which are completely bare. We have the wonderful carpets of wood anemones at the far end of Grinlow, but we have large areas of bare ground through the rest of the plantations. Obviously, in the long run, BCA is hoping to nudge our woods back into a more natural state, to be a bit more like the natural woodlands that would grow or have occurred on the limestone and the gritstones of the Peak District. And obviously, ground flora is a key part of a woodland ecosystem. So we are, in the long run, also interested to see what we can do to try to diversify the ground flora of our woods. Now, strangely, there's been a huge amount of interest in the establishment and creation of new woodlands, the restoration of woodlands, but there's been remarkably little work done on the best ways of reintroducing woodland ground flora. It's a great gap in our knowledge base. And a few years ago, when I was organising professional training courses for the National Park Study Centre for staff from people like the Woodland Trust and Forestry Commission and DEFRA, I actually got in contact with our speaker tonight, Dr. Eleanor Cohn, who at that time was working as part of the Applied Sciences Department at Wolverhampton University, because she was one of the very few people who had been actively studying how to best re-establish ground flora in woodlands. And so I invited her to come on that course to share her knowledge with those professionals. Obviously now I thought it would be a very useful thing to invite Eleanor back again to talk to BCA about her experiences of doing this work. And obviously the important thing here is that we could spend a lot of time playing around, trying things, failing at something else. But it seems very important to basically learn from other people's experiences and not to try and reinvent the wheel. So hopefully Eleanor can give us some tips and experience to help shortcut the process for us to find effective ways of doing this in parts of our woodlands. So hand over to you, Eleanor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, a very, very good evening to you all. I have to say that when I started doing this work, which was back in 1989, I thought that this was my dream job. Before that, I'd studied as a mature student, and thinking about what I wanted to do when I'd finished my studies, woodlands, ground floor in woodlands. Lo and behold, a PhD studentship came up and I was able to do it. And it was my dream job. And I've not stopped being enthusiastic about it ever since. And it's been lovely just to follow these up, share, look at the way that the woodlands have developed. So yes, that was absolutely my dream job. So what I was going to share tonight, I wasn't quite sure when I came up here just what the woodlands were going to be like that you were with, but I've had a lovely afternoon looking at Bluebell Wood, and it was beautiful. I mean, the beech trees are lovely. I mean, they may cast too much shade. They might not know where to stop, but they are lovely. So these are the topics. This is the topics I was going to will cover this evening. Covers the whole span, right from your planning stages right to where it might be in 20 or 30 years' time. But I'm aware that the implementation is really it's what you want to get going with, isn't it? So I will probably spend more time on that. I hope I don't sound too prescriptive about it. Peter says, we'd want to learn and so on. Do this, do that, don't do the other. If I start doing that, just remember, I used to be a university lecturer. I've got grandchildren as well, so I'm very bossy. So I mean, this is the sort of thing that we often see under beech and it's what woodlands could look like. I mean, these are not very good pictures, but bluebells, wood anemones and snowdrops and so on. This is what we actually like to see when we go into woodlands in the spring. But before we can start doing things, we do need to think about what we're doing and plan it and be absolutely sure about why we're doing things, because somebody will come along and say, oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, those are ancient woodland plants, or you always shouldn't mess about. If they're meant to be there, they'll come. You'll hear all these arguments. And it's quite right that we should think carefully about why we're doing this and be ready to justify it, because our ancient woodlands are special. And whatever we're doing, we must never, ever think that what we're doing is recreating ancient woodlands, because we're not. Ancient woodlands are special. When you stand on a patch of ancient woodland, you're not just looking at the lovely ground flora and the beautiful trees and so on. You've also got thousands of years of history. Sorry. They've got a. Sorry.
I was just getting something off the screen, and then inadvertently I went forward a slide.
No problem. I don't think it matters. I'll just go back to that. So yes, we do need to respect our ancient woodlands, but conversely, what will people in the future think if we just leave our degraded woodlands or our plantation woodlands bare and uninteresting looking? They'll say, why on earth didn't they do something about it? Why haven't they left it? So there's not really any justification for leaving our secondary woodlands impoverished, but we do need to think carefully about what we're doing and why we're doing it. I've put down this on this and the next slide. There are 5 scenarios which you might be dealing with, and I think really most of what you're going to be doing here would concern maybe the first 2. So restoration of ancient woodland, where it's become degraded and it's lost its ground flora. We can't just leave it like that. We can help restore, put back what was there. But the way we do it might be different from some other scenarios. We'd want to make sure that we got local provenance of plants, so that the ecotypes, the particular ecological characteristics of the species that we're putting in are the ones which would be here anyway. Plantation alongside ancient woodland, again, you can, in that sort of situation, you can help things along by moving small amounts of soil. It's quite legitimate to do that, because when you bring soil in, you bring propagules in, you bring in the seeds and so on of what might normally grow there, but you're also bringing in other biota which are part of the woodland ecosystem, which help with the process of decomposition and everything. You're bringing in all these other things as well. I don't really want to go through it in a lot of detail, otherwise I'll run out of time. But if you might have a plantation that you're wanting to take on the characteristics of an ancient woodland, and there may be the possibility. Again, it's a good way to compensate for losses of ancient woodland, and we've had plenty of those. But again, local seed sources, if you possibly can. You could, along the edges, put in some more cosmopolitan woodland and woodland edge species. That's the matter of judgment at the time. I'm going to pass by those. I don't think you're into amenity plantations. Although I think you might possibly in the future be dealing with some new plantations. Am I right, Peter? You might possibly. Yes. What I would. Yes. Okay. Well, I'll come to that later. So you've decided what you're dealing with, and you've decided what your aims are. You now need to just properly assess your site and see what in more detail what you've got. Whether you need to do any scrub clearance, I don't think you do in Bluebell Wood. How is the woodland being used? Can it be accommodated? Will the local people be happy with what's going on? Look and see what's there already. Look down, look to see what's there already. Not just to assess whether you've already got some of the species that you want, but also to see whether you've got any that you don't want that might be troublesome. What's the state of the tree canopy? Well, I think you know that pretty well in Bluebell Wood. I think some decisions are already being made there. And the landscape context. How is what you're going to do fitting into the wider landscape, the other woodlands in Buxton, the other, I mean, for example, there's right next to Bluebell Wood, Peter pointed out a little bit of land which wasn't part of your holding, but which is at the moment planted up with birch. Now that would have potential, you see. So how can you fit that into the grand scheme as well? Right, so on to implementation. We're going to get going. You've done all your preliminaries, you've decided what you've got and what you're dealing with, what you're going to do. Let's deal with any potential barriers to success, because you want to do the best you can. Dense grassy vegetation, which clearly you haven't got at the moment, is definitely an issue. It will slow down greatly your germination rates and the rate at which things will spread. So you will need, if in any situation where you have got dense grassy vegetation on the edges of your woodlands or anything, it is a barrier, it is a problem. And you might need to think about, dare I say it, some herbicide. What you might find in some of your woodlands is a lot of moss on the surface. I would rake that out. I think, rather than sowing over or into the moss. Bramble, ivy, oh, it is a part of the woodland ecosystem. It's a legitimate part of the ecosystem. It's good for ground nesting birds. It has its, and small mammals and so on. So it does have a role, but it is almost incompatible with a woodland ground floor. I've done experiments in ivy covered secondary woodland, older woodland like yours, which was covered in ivy, and I raked out some ivy fronts. I raked out some of the ivy, planted against the ivy front, and the ivy just trampled everything, almost everything. I think Enchanter's Nightshade was the only thing that didn't get trampled. Tall herbs such as nettle and cow parsley and so on are not quite the problem that you might think, because their period of growth is different. It's later in the year. So the woodland ground floor that we like to see, the spring bluebells, wood anemone and so on, grow before the nettles and so on get going. But this sort of situation is not good. Bramble is not good. You've got raspberry in Bluebell Wood. It's behaving itself at the moment, but just watch it. Bare ground would seem to be ideal, except of course there's always a reason why the ground's bare. And if there's nothing growing there, then you know your bluebells, wood anemone, nothing else is going to grow there. It's probably because of the shade, but just look out for soil compaction. I didn't think that there was a problem with soil compaction in Bluebell Wood, but it can be an issue. Because of course the trouble is, if there's nothing growing there, when people come and visit the wood, they'll go all over the place and the soil can get compacted. And it has been quite a problem at Kew Gardens. My son lives near Kew Gardens, and that's been quite an issue there. Underneath their trees, become very, very compacted, and the trees are rather sickly and have had to be aerated. So just be aware of that as a potential problem. Right, so we're ready to choose some species. What are you going to introduce? You, I think, are going to be on the whole looking for a semi-natural type target community. And you've got local woodlands that you can use as a guide. And obviously the National Vegetation Classification. I think I saw a reference to that in Peter's document, that you have looked at what sort of woodlands in the National Vegetation Classification you've got. But they're not a recipe, those lists, because I mean, bramble features high in the list of common species in a lot of woodland types, and nobody would actually, I don't think anyone would actually want to introduce bramble. But then you might think, well, what about dog's mercury? That's a common species in woodlands, but that could be a little bit invasive, and it's not particularly attractive, but it's authentic. You've got this balance all the time. You've got to think about these things. So how are you going to modify these lists from your woodlands? Are the site characteristics at your wood similar to the local woodlands? Are the soil types the same? The geology the same? What about the likelihood of spontaneous colonization? Will they get there on their own? You know, save you a bit of work if they can likely to get in. But actually, woodland herbs and not woodland ground flora species are not terribly good at traveling. Bluebell seeds, big heavy seeds in an escape, and the best they can do is fall over. That's dispersal for you. I bet you get an ant carrying a great big bluebell seed. They're big seeds. Potential for invasiveness and attractiveness. You know, how authentic do you want to be? Ethical considerations. I'm saying you don't want to leave your woodlands impoverished, but on the other hand, where do you stop? You might think, oh, bluebells are all right. Bluebells are fairly widespread, fairly common. Wood anemone, same. But then you get onto something like, you might have herb Paris in your woodlands. Would you introduce that? I think most people would curl up their toes and say, maybe not, with something like herb Paris. So, you know, you've got to think about, because something like herb Paris is special. It does tell you that it's where it's growing. This is an ancient woodland, very strong ancient woodland indicator. So ultimately, it's going to come down to cost and availability of material. But make your list, make your wish list. And as I say, be prepared to justify whatever you choose. So these are some which I would have no problem about introducing. Some people might. As I say, be prepared to justify. I put a P by the wood anemone and the yellow archangel because they are ones which it will be difficult to get going from seed. if you collect yellow archangel seed, I mean, go out into a woodland where it grows, and there's lots of seedlings. This is really frustrating. Lots of seedlings growing. And you collect the seed and you look after it, nurture it, do all the right things, give it its chilling treat, do everything that you should. Oh, it goes into a deep sulk and it won't germinate. So that's yellow archangel. So that's better going in as a Fifa plant. And wood anemone, it does, will germinate fairly readily, but it does take a long time, like about 10 or 11 years to flower and set seed and do its own thing. They're slow growing. This is the thing. This is one of the characteristics of woodland plants, is that they are characteristically slow growing. Their strategy in life, their way to survive, is to just find somewhere nice and just consolidate in that place. Stay put, and just get on slowly building, spreading. They're not active colonizers. Some summer species, I should have wiped Campanula Catrillium Betelgeuse bellflower. We're a bit far north for that anyway, I think.
Just grow here.
You've got some.
Yeah.
It's a lovely plant. It's a lovely plant. If you think it'll grow, go for it. It's a lovely plant. But it is actually, I mean, where I am, which is in the Midlands, it's at the northern end of its range. But go for it if you've got it. Foxglove, I've never had any luck with foxglove, would you believe it? I don't know why. I've got it growing in my garden, it loves it there, but so the summer ones, as you can see, apart from Enchanter's Nightshade, they're all fairly, they're woodland edge species rather than woodland shade species. Enchanter's Nightshade is the only one of that lot that's a proper shade tolerator. And don't forget the grasses. People forget about the woodland grasses, and they are beautiful. I'm sorry, I couldn't find any decent photographs of them, but they are, I'm a lousy photographer, I'm afraid. But they are, but the woodland grasses are lovely. Wood melick is beautiful. You must have wood melick around here, mustn't you? Yes, oh, get some in. Wood melick, they're beautiful, I love them. So, and they provide, I mean, you don't need much seed because once they start flowering, set seed, they spread all over the place. They're lovely. So yes, don't forget the grasses. Damp areas, you know all about Allium ocynum. We've got plenty of that. I've had some success with opposite leaf golden saxifrage in some of the woods in the Midlands, where that's been introduced. Right, now then. How are you going to do it? What are you going to have? You're going to use plants, plugs, seed. The advantages of seed, it's cheaper. If you're buying it, it's cheaper. But more importantly, probably, if you use seed, you're introducing a lot more genetic variability into your wood. And it means that there's a greater chance that there'll be at least one or two individuals which are ideally suited to that site, and then they'll flourish, reproduce and spread their seed. So that's quite an important thing. If you just have a plant, take a plant, or not just one, but if you have some plants, you've got to choose the seed. There's only one set of genetic variability there. You're choosing where you put them, and so you don't get such good cover. You choose, and you just hope that you've chosen the right place for them. So you get better a lot. You can cover a lot more ground with seed. Obviously, it takes longer. The disadvantage, it does take longer for them to reach maturity, as I've just said about wood anemone, for example. And the seedlings are more vulnerable. But if you've ensured that the site is properly prepared and you've overcome all the barriers to success, any compaction, grassy vegetation, etc., they should flourish. And to be honest, if it's not right, if seedlings are going to be vulnerable, the plants won't flourish anyway, because if they're going to spread, they're going to produce seedlings. So pot plants mature more quickly, less vulnerable, yes. And as I say, for species like wood anemone and yellow archangel, you'll need to use vegetative material. And fortunately, they're easy to propagate on. I mean, if you were to dig up a small patch of wood anemone, you'd have loads of material, loads of little rhizomes. Pot plants are obviously a lot more expensive. And as I say, you can't cover the site variability issue in quite the same way. And the long-term prospects won't be good if seedlings won't flourish. Commercial seed mixes. You see, I've put a question mark there. I can't think of any advantages of using a commercial seed mix. And I'll show you why in a minute. I'm not disrespecting seed merchants. They have a difficult job because it's a very dodgy job. You know, you're dependent on the seasons and demand and so on. You can't forecast demand. So it's not an easy thing not an easy business to be in. But I'm afraid the hazards of being in that business lead them to use too many species which are not appropriate or in the wrong proportions. They will shovel dodgy quality into seed packets. I did actually have a seed merchant admit that to me at one time, that they put their dodgy stuff into the seed packets, you know, the seed mix packets. So too many unknowns. So I can't. If you take home only 1 point from this, it's don't use a commercial seed mix. If you want to use commercially bought seeds, buy them as individual species. This is an Emmersgate seed mix. As I say, oh, I've lost the colour. Oh, that's funny. Oh. Sorry about that. I put traffic light colours on them and they've gone. I'm not sure how that's happened, but it doesn't matter. So if we have a quick look at this seed mix, 80% of the seed is grasses, grasses. Let's get the grammar right. 80% of the seed are grasses, and of those, that is the only one. Woodfall Sprague is the only one that you want in your woodland. Wood meadow grass is lovely, that you would want, but if you buy it from a seed merchant, it'll be an agricultural ecotype. It won't be the right ecotype. The rest of the grasses, you wouldn't want. You really would not want those in your wood. You really wouldn't. You wouldn't want to find them in your wood. If they'll find their own way there, if they're meant to be there. But they're all the others are grasses of open habitats, cosmopolitan ones. So they're not going to grow anyway. So why bother putting them there? And if they do grow, you've got problems because they're invasive. They'll be a nuisance. And of the rest of the ones which are not grasses, there's only about 4 or 5 in that list that you would want to bother introducing into the sort of woodland communities that you're trying to create. So you'd want ramsons, yes, nettle-leaf bellflower maybe, foxglove maybe. Don't touch wood avens with a barge pole. It gets everywhere.
It does. It's getting into my garden. It drives me nuts.
Oh, do you know, in my naivety, you learn from other people's mistakes. In my naivety, I put it in the seed mix that I used when I started my experiments. Oh, did I regret that?
It's awful, especially if you like the other of the species. It's really.
Oh, yeah, well, absolutely, yes. No, it has no manners. It doesn't know when to stop. But I think you get the idea that you don't know what you're getting with a seed mix, and there's only a tiny proportion of species that you actually want. So why not buy them as individual species rather than a seed mix? As I said, no disrespect to the seed merchants, but nevertheless. Right, where are you going to get it from? As much as you can, local as you possibly can. you know, if you were to extend the bluebells in Bluebell Wood, for example, you would obviously collect the seed from the what to me today was the far end. But when you do collect seed, I mean, you are the landowners, so you don't need, you can ask yourselves, please may I collect this? So, but always, if you're going onto somebody else's land, always ask permission. Always anyway, only from vigorous populations. You don't want to diminish the populations that you're collecting from, which would be no more than 20 to 25% of the viable seed. Collect it into, try not to use plastic bags. It's very tempting to use plastic bags, but if you leave them in overnight, you'll have silage in the morning. So, you know, that they'll start going moldy. So collect it, if you can, into paper or cloth bags, or if you have to use plastic bags, transfer them as soon as you get home. Don't leave them in plastic bags. Cardboard trays, let them dry out. You know, you want them to dry at room temperature. Or you can put them in paper envelopes to keep them safe. Make sure you label them. It's woodland grasses you will have to collect from the wild. They're very difficult to get in from commercial suppliers. If you do use commercial suppliers for any seed, let them know that this is going to be a high profile activity that you're doing. And buy your species individually. Do some germination tests and let the merchant know that you're going to do some germination tests to see how viable they are. And do check the provenance, make sure it's from the UK. Most of them are pretty good, and most of them are, but you know, do source from the UK, but just check on that. Now, if you do buy it, or if you've collected it, it's very precious, but if you buy it, it is eye-wateringly expensive, especially for some seeds. Not so much for bluebell or foxglove, they're not so bad, but something like primula or sweet woodruff, they will be very expensive. So you need to look after it. And the best thing to do is to bulk it up with silver sand to make it go further. If you hold 50 or 200 pounds worth of seed in your palm of your hand, which you can do, you don't want to go into your woodland and start scattering it like that, because you'll within 2 minutes you'll have nothing left, especially if you get the local school kids to help you. So bulk it up with silver sand. It makes it go a lot further. You can spread it more evenly. You can determine your sowing rate, and best of all, you can see where you've sown it. You can see where it is. So bulk it up with a sowing rate. Now then, you will see sowing rates always, as far as I've seen, they're always quoted as so many grams per square metre. Grams of what? Now, as I said, I'm not sure. Yes, I have said here, bluebell seed is about 100 times heavier than a foxglove seed. So it's not very helpful just to know, be told, you know, so many grams per square metre, because otherwise you'll absolutely swamp everywhere with foxglove or nettle-leaf bellflower or whatever, because they've got tiny seeds. You can find seed weights so that you can then determine how many seeds will give you a sensible sowing rate. I used 100 seeds per square metre for most species, which is really quite generous. You can get away with less than that. Get away with less. Sow seed in autumn or winter. Plants you might put out in the spring, but seed is best sown in the winter. The reason being that a lot of these species need a chill treatment before they will germinate. They need to be imbibed. They need to be moist, you know, to be brought back to life, and then they need to experience alternating freezing and warming temperatures before, and that's their trigger to germinate. Then they know germinate in the spring. If you do use pot plants, plant them in little clumps rather than leaving your precious plants to fight on their own. So put them in groups. Now then, maybe with a single glade in a single woodland, it's not difficult to, to know what you've done and where. But if you're doing a lot, you need to just note things down, what you've sown, where you've sown it, and find some way to relocate the area that you've sown. Because in the first year or two, you might not see an awful lot. There's another thing. Have faith. In the first year of my experiments, a PhD is 3 years. It's not long, is it, for woodland ground flora? And the first year, there was almost nothing to be seen. The second year, fortunately, one of my supervisors said, have faith, have faith. And I did, fortunately. But anyway, note down and map what you've done. Find some way. Gateposts and things are probably the most reliable. I'm sure the people around here are a lot more polite than around my way, because all the pegs that I put in to mark my plots, the kids would come along, work at them until they got them out, and then have a bonfire on my plots. Do keep records of what you've done for the future. It's not just about, doing something and making it look nice. People need to know in the future what's been done. And that's one of your arguments for people who say you shouldn't do it, because we won't know whether it's an ancient woodland in the future. You'll have records. Management. Well, there's not a lot to say about management, really. Management is mostly really about countering negative trends. Anything that might prevent your carefully nurtured plants and seeds from doing their best. So you're always going to have to balance shade. Shade is good for keeping down competitive vegetation, but actually your woodland plants, they do like light as well. So you don't want it to be too shaded. It's a balance. Look out for increases in bramble and or ivy. I think bramble or raspberries are your most likely problem. Look out for increases and make sure that it's not going to interfere with your, it's not going to trample all over your plants. And just watch out, if they start off doing well, your introduced plants start off doing well, and they suddenly start doing less well. Why is that happening? Probably shade, but I don't know. And heavy foot traffic, you might need to just guide people's, especially where in woodlands like yours, possibly where they're used to being able to go anywhere. Then you might want to just try and find little piles of dead wood or something, just to steer people away from where you've been. I think this is important to watch and learn from what you've done. It's all very well learning from what other people have done. You're going to learn most from what you do, and you'll learn most about what might work here for you in this area and with the species you're dealing with. So do monitor the most basic, the most basic level. I've done 3 levels, and it's you will do whatever works best for you. But at least just walk through the woodlands, see what's germinated, and do a rough count of individuals. Each season in the spring, just rough count of individuals. Or if there's so many, you can go on to the next one and do some semi-quantitative. But look through not just how your introduced species are behaving, but how potential competitors are behaving as well. I don't know whether you're familiar with the day 4, so-called day 4 scale. It's just a handy way of recording, giving a rough estimate of how much of a particular species is present. So if it's present everywhere you look, you can see it. Say it was dominant, abundant, but not actually looking as though it's going to trample everything else. frequent, just present in small numbers, and so on, occasional and rare. So day 4. And then if something is absolutely heaving, you know, one area is absolutely heaving, but it's not anywhere else, you can say that it's locally dominant, LD, locally dominant. And it just provides a very quick way of recording it. If you want to, and I've just put this here, this is a monitoring form which I designed for the nature improvement area in the West Midlands. They were given large sums of money to do work, and we did some work on woodlands. And this was just an easy monitoring form for people who might not be able to identify everything, but just to be able to identify some key species, which will let you see what the general trend is. So there's just a little box there for you to say, make some general observations of what's going on in the woods. You know, any major problems or good things as far as that goes, and then you can just put a D, A, F or whatever against some key species, and it just keeps it simple. You can do that very, very quickly. And then the formal monitoring, if you really want to get fancy, you can put quadrites down and do that. But I'll just leave that as there, as on there. How are we doing for time? You know, we didn't start at 6, did we? She says defensively. How much time?
It's cautious.
Okay, so.
Another quarter now.
Yes, but I want to. Anyway, let's just see how some of these develop. So this is one in the Midlands in Telford, and this is as it says there, on former agricultural land. There's lots of different blocks there, all around about a hectare or so, and rides separating them. Now on this block here, on that side, you can see there's quite a lot of coarse vegetation. On this block on this side, absolutely bare underneath, absolutely bare. No beech, mind you, but just a dense canopy. Although they did thin quite a bit, but even when they thinned, nothing much came up. So we did some experiments along the edge there, not actually inside the wood, but along this far edge here. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail about the experimental layout, but there were strips 5 meters wide, which went 10 meters in from the woodland edge into the woodland. And then the grassy vegetation was eliminated, or not eliminated, as light rotivation. And a seed mix put down. And this is just I'm just going to sort of take you through the stages really, because initially you get a lot of, you know, quite a lot of germination, and you get this intimate mix of species, all very close. Nobody, you know, there's bluebells there, primroses, violets, there's metal leaf bellflower. So you get this intimate mix, but as it develops, everything sort of consolidates. You get a lot less bare ground, but it's still a fairly intimate mix, still a fairly fine-scale mosaic. Bluebell, sweet woodruff, woodavens, cleavers, nettle. What else we got there? Bluebell, did I say bluebell? Anyway, oh yes, I'm not sure I mentioned that one. It's a lovely little thing. Is wood speedwell, and that does very well. Once it's germinated, it'll find its spot and think, nice here, spread. Yeah, these lovely patches, very pretty. And then about 15 years later, you've got some sorting. It's starting to sort a little bit, but still quite an intimate mix. Red Campion. Now then, red Campion. That's come up in your wood. Sorry, just to wind back a second. One of the justifications that seed merchants use for putting in all these grasses, they will say their justification will be, it acts as a nurse crop. It's a nurse for the woodland plants. I mean, it's nurse rat shit. It's, you know, it's not. This is not good nursing. It's putting this. But red Campion arguably could act. I mean, it did in these in here. Red Campion was I might even have a chance to show you it later, but red Campion is more justifiably used as a nurse crop. And then you get a sorting stage when the vegetation becomes a lot more larger. You get larger scale mosaics, larger patches. So we've got primroses and bluebell here, and frankly, not a lot else. So initially, you get this lovely mosaic of lots of different species, but then it sorts itself out, and the bluebell gets going, the primrose gets going, whatever it is really happiest there and can reproduce fastest, either by vegetated means or by seed, will do best. So you get the primroses in March and April, and then the bluebells produce. Now this is after 24, 25 years. So you can get a Bluebell Wood in that time. And it's not changed an awful lot in the last few years. This is where it's at the moment. So looking at this here, I don't know if you can see that little line there. That yellow, that light colour, that's the primroses. So that's looking towards the edge, from inside the wood towards the edge. And there has been virtually no spread into the woodland, apart from the one little guy down there. There's always one. But you can see it's a very rigid line. Now that front has extended. It's extended about 2 or 3 meters over this time period, this 25 years, but it's not really carried over much. I'm being a little bit unfair. There are some patches which have come, which are, there's, besides that little individual, there has been a little bit of spread, but you can see it's not exactly dramatic. This is another area which is the Woodland Interior, where there was no ground preparation needed because there was plenty of bare ground. There was a ground floor, about 30 or 50% cover of hogweed, rough meadow grass, dandelion, nettle, bramble, and lesser celandine. But it was still quite open. So the seed mix was put in there. So after 8 years, this is 8 years, they've consolidated very well. You can see, especially the red Campion. It's a lousy photograph. I'm sorry, I'm just not a photographer. And I did get other people to take photographs, and they didn't take very good photographs either. It's difficult taking photographs in woodlands. That's my excuse. So yes, again, these lovely patches of sweet woodruff, nettle-leaf bellflower, bluebell. And then you've got this sorting again, this sorting out. The sweet woodruff has found a patch, and look at the size of it. It's huge. The bluebells being pushed out. They've actually not managed to trample over the sweet woodruff. But there again, it's turned itself into a bluebell wood, basically. But at the bottom, this was taken in in that same block, but in an area down slope where it's a receiving area. It's like the receiving area in Bluebell Wood, where you've got all the wild garlic. It's getting a little bit of moisture running down the hill, and that's what this has got here. So it's not as dry, and you've got a much more, even after all that time, you've still got this intimate mix of lots of different things there. So that because the soil conditions are more varied, so bluebell doesn't actually like getting its feet wet, and that's why, because it has a bulb which it keeps pulling further down into the soil. As it gets older, it pulls it further and further down. So if the soil is damp, then the bulbs rot and it doesn't do well. And that's where you get wood anemone instead. I've got a little series here, I think, which is to make the point that you just never know what's going to do well and where it's going to do well. That's why seed works so well, because you're giving every you're giving every species a chance to find its own spot. So this is not some lovely ancient woodland or anything else you might be able to tell from the trees. This is a rather, I don't know, degraded, I don't quite what's the right polite word, but it's just a young amenity plantation, basically. It's on a post-industrial site, so there's a lot of toxicity around as well. And it's not particularly damp, but the wild garlic found its spot. And this is another one. This is another fairly, it's a post-industrial, it used to be a steelworks site. And what has decided that it likes this spot? I mean, would you have picked it? Maybe not. Woodfalse brome, it's a lovely woodland grass, beautiful. And the primroses are doing well, but they've found their spot. That's what they like there. Right nearby, the most disgusting place on the whole site, what's grown? Wood sanical. Now that is an ancient woodland plant, very particular about where it grows, but yeah, it's found a nice little spot there. Of course, the toxicity, I suppose, stops other things that might compete from growing with it. Canal side, who knows? We put the usual seed mix down. It's not marched its way into a bluebell wood. It's marched its way into a millet wood, another beautiful woodland grass. There it is. Oh, some little leaf bellflower for you as well. But it's a lovely grass. If it's a legitimate one to put in your woodlands, do put it in. But yes, who knows what's going? You know, you can't predict. So I would say, sorry, I can't resist just showing this. This is hardcore, okay? So not even proper soil, newly planted trees. I had a bit of seed mix left over, spread it over there. I thought, well, you know, I didn't want to take it home with me. Put it on there. And 18 years, it's turned into, you know, everything flourished. The trees are just dire. It looks like a forester's nightmare. But look at the ground flora. Fantastic. And who would have thought on top of this hardcore, this brick, you know, brick spoil and stuff. I don't know whether you can see what that is, but it's Meadowsweet. You know, this plant that likes fluctuating water levels. Right. So some lessons, take some conclusions. Regeneration gaps. You've got to have your gap. You've got to have the bare ground to get your seed into. It's no good trying to leave it to compete with grasses or anything else. They, once established, they are quite tenacious, provided they don't get trampled on by the bluebells. Shade's important, but not too much. They're light-loving as well. Seed is best. Single season operations, you don't have to keep doing, you know, you can, it's important really when for local authorities and for people, you know, short of money, if you can do it in one single season, get it done. It's a cheaper way of doing it. And because they once established, the woodland plants do well, they will tolerate a certain amount of invasion isn't a good word, but they will tolerate a certain amount of spontaneous vegetation as well. And it goes for a much more natural looking vegetation if you've got the nettles and everything else as well, because they're part of the woodland ecosystem as well. So they're resilient, monitor the outcomes, and what, you know, a good takeaway message, do be open-minded about outcomes. Don't try and say, well, this is what we want. Put down the right species and let them get on with it and see what comes, and just monitor it and celebrate it and enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you.